You might want to wrap it up in a couple of days.
Yeah, why's that?
The last place you want to be is cooped up with a dozen Norwegian guys.
We estimate it's been here 100,000 years.
That's not possible. This thing detects its prey. Copies it perfectly. And then hides inside it. Not all of us are human.
Hi everyone and welcome to Geekfest Rants. My name is Carlos Perone and joining me once again is Steve. We are going to be continuing right now with part 2 of our Deconstructing the Thing special, the 2011 thing. We are going to pick it up where we left off last week in one of the crucial, essential, most shocking scenes of the film.
So the Americans make their way back into the main building, and then we have a showdown between all of these people, and then the thing reveals itself again, and we have probably the biggest gross-out assimilation scene begins.
We also see the creation, or the after effect, of that mutated one from the Carpenter film where the face is melted into another face.
Right.
It's like a face that almost has shifted on its axis and almost melted into two separate sections. We find out how that came about.
And what's great about that is that's only one portion of that entire scene, because this particular Norwegian, who is, I guess, the commander, the station commander, if you will, he's in charge of all the crew members working for Dr. Sander. Turns out that he's the thing, and they're trying to carry him. He gets hurt or something, and they're dragging him through the room, and he starts to come apart. His arm pulls off, and his other arm pulls off, and they turn into these centipede-type characters,
like the
little
spidery things.
Yeah, little spider centipede things, and they go running off, and then his body starts to do all kinds of moving and shaking, and he falls backwards, and his body kind of gets spun around the other way, and his arms pop out. I should say new, long, muscular arms pop out. Again, it looks very much like a spider, and his head is upside down, and he's looking at all these people, and you have a different variation on the tentacle. In the Carpenter version, we see that tentacle, it's almost like a rope that wraps around people. In this version, in the prequel, it's more of like a whip.
Yeah, that's right.
And it winds up incapacitating people, so it injures them.
It's almost like a scorpion strike.
Like a scorpion strike, exactly. So this thing is extremely powerful, and it's just whipping all around the room and going after certain people. So in a very short period of time, it incapacitates several members of the team, and it hones in on one member in particular, Adam Finch, who's the research assistant, and it kind of crawls over to him.
It's the most creepiest, disgusting thing.
It's the creepiest thing I've seen in a long time, and the visual was, I still can't shake the visual, and I'm not easily shaken by these things.
This is the equivalent of, in the Carpenter film, of the chest-busting scene.
Of the chest-busting scene, yes.
It's very creative, it's very weird, and it has a great link to the Carpenter film.
Yes. So the thing crawls over Adam, the research assistant, and it kind of settles on him.
But you also said before, it's kind of like a person, like if you're like some kind of yoga instructor, and it's like walking on your arms and legs, but backwards, almost like if you're a table.
Right.
You have to see it to understand and to believe how bizarre it looks.
Yes, and then the head kind of nuzzles up
and it's
against
like
Adam, the
rubbing
research
against his
assistant.
face.
It's almost like, what's going on here? Is this thing getting friendly with him,
like,
or
is
what?
He gonna bite
like he's
him
going to kiss him? And the look of sheer terror on this guy's face, and just, this thing is on top of me, and it's starting to rub against my
it's making
face.
These weird noises, like,
and they're making these weird noises, and then all of a sudden, it rubs, I guess, just enough and it starts to pull its head away, and it has grafted onto his head, and it starts stretching his head, and he's screaming for dear life, and it turns into the split-headed monster that is found in its charred form and then comes back to life, when it warms up inside the American research station, and then that thing starts stalking all of these people.
But it takes its time.
Oh, it does take its time.
They purposely cut away, to see other people's reactions, and every time they cut back, it is more graft and more becoming one unit, one organic blob.
But it's not turning into one or the other of the two men.
It's
both.
turning
into... This is why I think that, there were theories that, the thing that jumps out of the ice, it could be just the previous life form that it assimilated. I disagree with that, because when it's in this interim stage, it looks very similar, although it has various differences. But it does kind of always mimic this spider-looking, creature.
And that's definitely not a human
that
template.
Has claws or tentacles. So I think that is the original form that they find. Yeah.
Yeah.
But man, that was freaky. So then, we have our characters, whoever is left, running for their lives, and the creature actually makes a run for it.
Right, it gets into somebody who's infected, let's say, who we suspect is infected, gets into one of these tractors.
It's the scientist who's funding this whole thing, seemingly, Dr. Sanders.
Right. Which, at the time, we had a little bit of a problem because we remember that at a certain point in the movie, they disabled all these tractors.
Yeah, so apparently they didn't disable them good enough.
Right. Or he was able to, I don't know if he found the keys or he was... Well, the creature, remember, if it can build a spaceship, I'm sure it could hotwire a car.
Yeah, I'm sure it can replace some hoses.
Right. And then our heroes, Lloyd and Carter, he kind of, I think, rigs... also the wires or the hoses to make it come up. But, okay, fine. Right. We'll give them that one. And they start chasing it out into the wilderness. Mm-hmm. And they end up at the ship, the mouth of the ship, the mouth of that cave where the ship is, where they can get into it without, obviously, they don't have to fall down the whole crevice. But they're able to walk into that area, looking into it. And then now they're standing basically on top of the ship. And do they split up?
No, what happens is the Sander thing starts up the ship.
From inside,
and and these louvers open up on the top of the ship, I guess, to let air in. Yeah, they're like venting louvers, and she falls in.
Right.
So he goes after her, so that's how they get split up. And then she comes into contact with the Sander thing, who kind of reminds me of something that you would have seen in, like, Hellraiser 2. This, like, spinning... vortex with faces on it.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the ship itself, because that's something we didn't see too much of in the first film, in the Carpenter film. We saw the ship flying and kind of crashing into the Earth, unless it wasn't crashing, unless it was a deliberate, bizarre landing into Earth or whatever. Mm-hmm. But we get to see the inside of the ship. It's very weird, the shapes and the way the walls are structured. And on her way, as she's walking towards what would be, I guess, the cockpit area where this creature thing is, she passes by this device that looks like some kind of a DNA restructuring holographic thing where you see these little boxes turning into other things.
Right.
What do you think that was?
I don't know. I think maybe it's the primary power source of the ship, perhaps. I don't think it's a life form. I think that it's definitely some sort of energy source. But I think that the creature, their technology, is based on their own genetics, their own biology.
Yeah.
Everything is about repurposing other materials. It almost looks like pixelation. I think that the reason it looks that way is because it's broken or something is not working properly, which it's trying to find the right sequence to make it work and to give it the ability to take off.
I guess until the DVD comes out and the commentary gets put out, we're not going to know for sure.
Right.
Because I haven't seen too much or any really merchandising in terms of books or making of material for this film that we could, look into. Okay, what's the deal with these things inside the ship?
Right.
Now, while we're inside the ship, we have a more traditional cat and mouse chase. Mm-hmm. hiding through the thing, crawling under things. The thing comes after you. To me, that was probably one of the weakest part of the movie because it became very standard.
Right.
It was, okay, the big creature's chasing you around and you quickly turn around and the music cues come in the right point. And it's almost kind of like not until they actually leave the ship, you get to the point where she has a dynamite stick or something or a pipe bomb or whatever. And at the last second, you throw that pipe bomb. And
it was a grenade.
It explodes. The grenade explodes.
It actually goes in the mouth of the sander thing.
Right.
And it explodes, and, the ship kind of blows up a little bit.
Yeah, it seems like it's damaged. They can't explode completely because then they see it in the ice and the Carpenter.
Right, but they did a good job, and again, linking this to the Carpenter film, because when the explosion goes off, they have a vantage point from outside, and you see that the snow that was covering the ship collapses as well.
On the ship.
Right, because if you remember from the Carpenter film,
the hatch.
There is a large opening. There's a large depression in the snow where the ship is.
Yeah, but hold on a second. We talked about this earlier. What was the deal with the excavation team, the black and white video footage of them marking all these circles, obviously marking the perimeter of the ship, and then exploding?
Well, it could be one of two things. It could be just a continuity error that they couldn't work around. They needed to have it look different for some reason. Because
if you think about it, whatever they did to uncover the ship in the beginning of the film should have been enough so that it looks that way when you get to the Carpenter film, when they're the ones visiting and they say, oh yeah, look, there's a big circle there and there appears to be a structure underneath of it. Maybe they did it because not so much so what it looks like afterwards, but to disable the ship, to make sure the ship is broken. Ship's not going anywhere. That's why in Carpenter's film, the guy's building another ship.
Maybe.
It's more about damaging the ship.
I don't know. It might not have anything to do with the ship, because if you remember in Carpenter's version, when they're watching these tapes, somebody says, there's hours of this stuff. They're out doing testing. So when they set those explosive charges, that might not have been related to the ship discovery.
Maybe
Could
it was
have been
the creature?
Yeah, because when you're doing that type of testing, they set those charges off to see what happens.
Oh,
and
to
they
drop the samples down, cores,
also
to drive the cores down?
The force of it sends the shock waves down, and what comes back up gives you some sense as to, is there liquid under the ground? Is there some other type of material? That's how they do it.
See, I gotta watch it again.
So I think that was not related, and that I think that what happened was, in the Carpenter version, we're led to believe that, okay, they're setting off all these charges, and then by accident, they kind of uncover this body in the ice, and they find a ship.
So the charges might not necessarily have anything to do with uncovering the perimeter.
Correct. And because they say it in the Carpenter film, there's hours of this stuff, or there's something to that effect, that leads me to believe that it could be unrelated, which is why the way that they had it collapse in the prequel is okay.
Now, if they were paying so much attention to as we've read, that they were trying to recreate as much as possible from that footage, did we see a scene where they're all there with the flags doing the perimeter measurements?
No.
And that's something they should have done, because that's something that would have been another linking point, nice linking point. But I guess
true.
You don't necessarily have to show everything, because then you're kind of following, okay, you got to show them this, you got to show them that, you got to show them.
Right.
But maybe that's a deleted scene for all we know.
Maybe. So they make their way out of the cave.
Right.
The cave collapses. They hop in the snowcat, and
they're catching their breath.
Right. They're talking about a Russian station.
Right, because they can't go back to their own station because that's in flames.
It's torched. Right.
And everybody's probably dead. And the plan is that Carter suggests is let's head over to he said something like 50 miles, there's a Russian station.
Right.
Now, granted, Lloyd doesn't know anything about what stations are out there because she's not part of the group.
Right.
So she has to take anybody's word as to what's around her.
Sure.
And tell us what happens.
Well, she hops out to get something.
Right.
Or he hops in first and she's talking to him, or she hops out to get something.
She starts asking him questions.
Yeah, she starts asking him questions, and
because he shows up after the explosion. Like, those two got separated in the ship. And then he comes back out after everything settles.
No, I think he grabs her.
Do they both come out at the same time?
Yeah, they come out together.
But while they were in the ship, they got separated.
They did,
Because
yes.
she was being chased by the Thing.
Right.
And he was, I don't know where the hell he was.
So she starts looking at him, and she says, you know how I knew you weren't the Thing? And he says, how? And she says, your earring. And you note, it's very noticeable, he has a hoop earring in his left ear throughout the entire film.
Yes.
And the way that it's lit, you really can't see if it's in or it's not. But then when she says that, you can see that clearly his earring is gone. So she torches him. And then she gets in the other snowcat, and then...
Now, when she's about to torch him, do you remember, does he kind of like acknowledge that you got me? Like, or does he fight it?
He does fight it, but then you hear, when he's burning, you hear the sound of the thing.
Screeching.
That...
Okay.
Yeah, you
so
hear
there's
it.
no doubt about it.
He's definitely turned. So she hops in the snowcat. It's a close-up on her face, and it cuts to black. So you think that the film is over.
Well, now here's the thing. That part of the film is over. We don't know where she's going. We don't know if this Russian station was for real. I mean, if you think about it, it could be real because then if he's the Thing, he might want to take her to this other place to infect this other place.
Right, and the thing that we do know is that when the Thing copies someone, it takes on everything.
Yeah.
Meaning that it's almost as if you
Memories.
are that person. So
Right.
your memories, all your flaws are present. You know, again, we talk about the Norris character in the Carpenter thing. He obviously has a heart defect. So the Thing can't do anything about that. It's taken on your life form. If you get
Right.
migraines, it's going to get migraines.
Right. But now let's theorize a little bit about this. Let's say she goes along with him.
Yeah.
He would kill her and either take over her body or discard her body and continue with that body towards somewhere, whether it's the Russian base or maybe the American base.
Right.
Now remember, the dog in the beginning of Carpenter heads towards the American base. The dog knows about the American base. How does the dog know about the American base?
That's a good question.
Is it transferring its knowledge from one creature to the next? In other words, the dog is the last creature, as far as we can tell, from the Norwegian group. Does that mean that dog possesses all the knowledge of every other person that it's absorbed? And therefore, because if you think about it, if all of a sudden this creature decides to take over a dog, now this thing is stuck with the dog's brain and knows absolutely nothing. It could just go in a circle because the dog has no memories, has no knowledge of anything.
Right.
So is it safer to say that now you have his memory and his memory and
Sure.
his memory, so the dog knows to go in that direction because that's the most reasonable place to go?
Well, then why wouldn't Carter say there's an American base 50 miles from here or 15 miles from here or whatever he says?
Unless it's a lie. It's a complete lie he's telling her because he's going to kill her and head to the American base. So she's useless to him. He doesn't need her.
Right.
So she doesn't have to tell the truth, which leads me to believe that there's probably no Russian base. She's dead.
Right.
Who knows? So we think this is the end of the movie.
Right.
Some people start
The credits
to get up
roll.
as usual.
And then
And
we hear
then
the
we get these
hear the
little-
familiar strains, the boom boom,
Right.
the Carpenter music.
Which brings us back to the base.
Yes.
And we see that
Lars is still alive.
who we've
Now-
completely forgotten about.
Yeah, he escaped from the firefight and the big assimilation scene.
Now, as we are, I think we're kind of panning and tilting through the base and seeing whatever's left of it. We do see him alive. We do hear there's a helicopter coming. And we also see, I believe, while he's coming out to welcome the helicopter, let's say, or to warn the helicopter, don't we see the inside of the base and we see the guy who commits suicide?
The suicide guy.
We don't
yeah.
see him. We see him afterwards, and it's the guy from the Carpenter film that has
Yep.
the frozen blood, and
Yep.
I guess he cut
He
his
cut his
throat.
wrist and then he cut his throat. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So, but we never saw that happen.
Nope.
But it's kind of like a little bonus. Here's we forgot about this guy. Here,
Yep.
check this out, and tell us what we see with the rifle and the dog.
So a helicopter lands and it's another Norwegian.
Completely new character.
And Lars comes out and they're talking to each other in Norwegian because Lars does not speak English.
Right.
He's one of the only team members who does not speak English. He's always working through a translator. So he is trying to communicate to the helicopter pilot, and the helicopter pilot is, what's going on here and blah, blah, blah. As they're talking, the dog darts out from a hiding spot and Lars starts screaming at the helicopter pilot, "We got to go after the dog." So he takes a few shots, he misses, they get in the helicopter, and again, this is all happening in little flashes because they're still running the credits.
Right, it goes back and forth
during this sequence.
Right.
And they get up in the helicopter, and the footage from this point towards the tail end is actually the footage from the beginning of the Carpenter film.
Right, it's reshot, obviously.
From what I understand, it is the footage.
No, really?
Now, I don't know if that's
I'm gonna have to check
true, but I haven't done a side-by-side analysis, but that's what I heard.
Oh, I got to check this out.
Now, because again, I was always curious as to how they were going to make that link, because obviously the guy who plays Lars and the guy who played the original Norwegian, totally different actors, but they do a really good job of covering him up, because the guy's
they're wearing those masks. And
they're wearing the mask,
snow
they're wearing
gear.
the glasses, they're wearing the hood, and I haven't watched Carpenter's film after seeing the prequel, so I want to go back and take a look at that, and look at the helicopter pilot to see if he looks similar to the guy in the Carpenter film, because you really don't see him that much in the Carpenter film, other than when that helicopter blows up.
Right.
Because again, one of those same grenades that Kate used to destroy the Sander thing in the ship is one of the ones that gets him into trouble and blows up their helicopter.
Right. Now, that's the way that we kind of end the whole story, and this is almost like a bonus scene if you think about it. This is the type of thing that normally they would have thrown at the end of the credit roll,
right?
But here they kind of give it to you, right? I guess they don't want people to just walk out of the theater.
Right.
Like, wait, guys, there's something else happening here, which is it's great in terms of it's another great link to the Carpenter film. My only problem with that end sequence, the way that they worked it out, the fact that this helicopter pilot is somebody who's coming there fresh out of nowhere.
Well, the assumption is that their distress signals were received.
Right. My problem is that, to me, it was a little too quick that this guy with a rifle will convince a pilot to go chasing a dog without giving him a bizarre explanation of, well, listen, this dog is an alien from another planet.
Right.
I wish there would have been a little more, like, this dog's infected with a disease that, give him something to convince the pilot.
Right.
So that it convinces me that this pilot would go along with, let's go chase him. When we watched the Carpenter film, I got the impression that
they were in sync.
Right. They were both part of this group, and they know exactly what they're doing because they know the danger of what's happening.
Right.
But I never got that feeling that the danger was passed from one person to the other, unless we're supposed to assume that them talking in their language, there is that exchange taking place.
Right.
But it seemed a little hokey to me.
Right.
But, what the hell?
Well, just some additional comments on the film. I thought that the fact that they did have some of the characters speaking in Norwegian to each other added to the, to the paranoia, because certain characters didn't know what they were talking about. So it could have been a copy trying to influence non-copies, or it could just have been the human nature side where the Norwegians are trying to stick together versus the Americans, because
and you do see a little of that.
You do.
Because the Americans are coming and they're like, oh, wait a minute, these guys are not part of our team. I think that the point you're making, I think it kind of works both ways. You're right. It does help in creating that paranoia, but I think the other problem is that because we don't understand what these guys are saying too much, it also keeps us at a distance. In other words, with the Carpenter film, we were a little more familiar with these characters. They were more individualized. You could tell, you could kind of, I don't want to say relate, but it's like, that's the cook, and he's got his funny thing. He's got his skates. And there's the stoner who's always cracking jokes having to do with this, and the doctor, and the grumpy old guy. With the Norwegians, it was more like, there's the Norwegians.
Right, a group of people.
Right. We never really got to know them individually.
No.
The Americans, we did a little bit because they're Americans. So you understand what they're saying, and they purposely are putting those characters in your face a little more.
Right.
Obviously, Carter is an important character. Again, we keep calling him Mr. Echo. There was not much to Mr. Echo, but you understand them.
Right.
So you get extra points for understanding what they're saying.
Right. Well, it was also worthy to note how they shot the film. The director did not want to shoot this digitally. The director wanted to shoot it 35mm film, Panavision, which is the same way that Carpenter's film was shot. They went to great pains to try to not just make it an homage, but to match the time period and the overall look of the film so that it wasn't all these quick cuts. You had some slower shots. It was very foreboding. And it also added to that sense of suspense, what's about to happen, people looking at each other in a slightly longer take as opposed to, the majority of the movies in this genre nowadays are very quick cuts, back and forth and building that tension, via speed as opposed to, kind of pulling back a bit. So they were constantly referencing certain things, especially within the camp itself, because those particular set pieces were in the Carpenter film, so they had to look identical. And I noticed it especially in the area where they had the block of ice in the camp.
Almost exactly
it
the
was
same.
Almost identical to the way that it looked. The stairs leading down and just the way that the block of ice looked. So, kudos to them for doing a really great job. The other thing that I appreciated is the monster effects weren't all CGI. They used some animatronics. They used some puppetry was involved. So, they went to great lengths to make sure that it felt like it belonged with that other film. And they could have probably done a slightly better job in 80s-fying the movie itself, meaning that what you see, especially in the rec room, to make it more like the 80s, they did it to a certain extent, but I just, and maybe it was because it wasn't an American camp. It was a Norwegian camp.
They can probably get away with it by saying, well, it's European.
Oh, it's European. But, that's an area where I thought they could have amped it up maybe just a little bit, or maybe even in the hairdos. They could have done it a bit more, but everybody kind of had the long, shaggy hair, which was beards, commonplace around that time anyway. But the other item that I really liked was the fact that even in the beginning of the film, they chose to use the old Universal Pictures logo. Right. So, I mean, to go to that, to the attention to detail to me was very well done.
Yeah,
and again,
definitely.
You got to figure they could have skimped it if they wanted to. They didn't have to do some of these things. They didn't have to show that bridge at the end, but they did. And, that to me helped to elevate some of the other maybe more inferior aspects of the film. Maybe, certain areas where they kind of did mimic, pardon the pun, given the content, the Carpenter film. So, and I do know that while that was always in the back of their minds from a storyline standpoint, as far as how we need to have that continuity, they really, the filmmakers kind of stressed more of the tone of the book on which the original film was based, the book Who Goes There. They didn't take as much creative license there.
I like the fact that, and this is something that happened this past summer. I remember one of the big hyped movies of the summer was Super 8. And the big hype about Super 8, it was that it was such a great thing that a known director is doing an homage to Steven Spielberg films, classic Spielberg films. And when I saw Super 8, it's like, yeah, you could see, oh, look here, they're taking a little from Jaws, and they're taking a little from Close Encounters, and they're taking a lot from E.T., and they're taking a little from that and there. But overall, I really wasn't that impressed with that film. In this film, I have a better sense of somebody who's doing an homage to Carpenter, not so much by making something completely original and having callbacks to Carpenter, but basically by doing a prequel. I mean, the fact that they try to tie it so much is not so much an homage, but it's a rule. You have to tie it. You can't just say, yeah, but this is a different movie, so we're doing it different. No. You need those connections. And I think in this particular film, they did them great. There's lots of little things that bother me. There are lots of little nitpicky things that I have about it. But it's kind of like when, I remember when we went to see the film and I told you, before we saw it, and I was like, what are my expectations of this film? And given the fact that it had already gotten some bad reviews from what I heard, even before we saw it, I was going in there with very low expectations, and I kind of saw the film, or I kind of expected the film to be more like, if it feels like it's deleted scenes from the Carpenter film, that's enough for me. Because it's kind of like, I want to see more of that Norwegian thing. I want to know where all that came from.
Right.
And that's exactly what I got. I got that backstory. I cannot say this is better than Carpenter. Carpenter does characters. or at least used to do characters better. I care more about those characters. You focus on these characters, you grab onto the Carpenter characters.
Right.
These guys are more disposable. The fact that, like we said before, the fact that there were Norwegians, you kind of group them all together as one group because you cannot attach yourself to individual ones. The American characters, they're not that strong, and like we said before, it looks like they took the Kurt Russell character and broke him in two. So they're not as strong. But the fact that they put so much time and effort into linking the films, that I think is what made it for me, a good film. The amount of detail that they put into making all those connections and linking so many little important parts or memorable parts of the original film to this, it gives them like extra points in my book. And I'll tell you the truth, after talking about this for about an hour, I want to see it again. I'm looking forward to when it comes out on DVD or Blu, especially Blu-ray. I want to see this thing again, and I really want to see extras. I want to see about the research. I want to learn more about how many things they actually had to be that much detailed about, because it's very interesting, these connections they made. And I'm sure there's probably a lot of stuff we've never seen yet. I'm sure there's more deleted scenes, concepts that they've abandoned, and just the research that went into it. I really would be interested in seeing that.
Well, hopefully when it comes out, we'll take a look, and if it doesn't have a commentary, which it probably will, I mean,
I'm sure it will.
Most of them do, we could do one about it. Cool.
Well, thank you, Steve, for joining me on this The Thing review. This isn't John Carpenter. This is just the plain thing, because the last one, I see it a lot labeled on any kind of database as John Carpenter's The Thing.
Right.
This one was The Thing.
Well, apparently they also debated about calling it The Thing 2 or something along those lines, but...
Well, 2 implies sequel.
Right.
So what comes before 1?
Well, Prometheus was taken already. So.
Oh, don't let's. We only have so much time and so much battery power.
I can't wait. I can't wait for that one.
The prequel that's not really a prequel, but it is a prequel. Okay, we'll deal with that later. Well, thank you again, Steve.
My pleasure.
And thanks to all of you for joining us on this 2-part special. We will see you here next time on Geekfest Rants. Bye-bye.
We found something quite remarkable.
Did you hear that? This thing has replicated a person.
That's not possible.
It's like a virus. Not all of us are human.
The Thing.
Stop.